The practice of drinking coconut water has gained some popularity. It's sort of cool, really. For example, you're consuming plant-based water. It's kind of intriguing, but does it really have anything to do with hydration? According to comparison research, coconut water is reasonably hydrating when compared to ordinary water. Like, there's a really big impact. In actuality, the International Journal of Health Sciences published a single investigation. In this athletic trial, participants were given water or coconut water and asked to complete a treadmill test or other submaximal activity. Additionally, they discovered that there was a slightly significant effect on hydration when compared to ordinary water, even if the results were not statistically significant. Now, there is a little bit more information and a mechanical knowledge of what's happening when you look more closely at coconut water for long-term hydration as a pure form of hydration. We therefore have a substance known as the SLUT1 transporter. Alright. Now SGLUT1 is also recognized as a sodium-gated channel. It's how you absorb carbohydrates. There are several ways to absorb glucose, but SL1 is the most common. It turns out to be a sodium-gated channel. Therefore, for the glucose to enter the transporter and eventually be absorbed, a certain amount of salt is needed. However, when sodium and glucose are combined, water accompanies the salt and glucose into the bloodstream, a phenomenon known as osmolarity or the osmosis effect. Thus, the hydration effect is rather substantial. In fact, because coconut water is so isotonic, some nations have even utilized it in intravenous IV fluids when they don't have any other options. It is fairly comparable to our body's total baseline level of like concentration of minerals. However, if we examine a study that was published in Sports Medicine, a broader meta-analysis that included 28 trials, they examined several approaches and concluded that isotonic was not always the best. In actuality, they contrasted hypertonic, which was equivalent to having more minerals and concentration than would be present in plasma. They contrasted hypertonic, which has a few fewer minerals than plasma would. They contrasted isotonic water, which is equivalent to blood plasma in general, with straight water. The isotonic actually had the lowest level of hydration. The substance that hydrated the best was actually somewhat hypertonic, meaning it was little lower than the blood's total content. From a basic osmolarity perspective, that makes sense, doesn't it? You have less concentration and more concentration. It will be drawn up with more focus. But why does that not happen with clean water? Well, since vasopressin is affected differently by clean water. Additionally, clean water can simply dilute the plasma osmolarity to the point that diuresis, the urge to urinate more, increases. Thus, there is a delicate equilibrium. Therefore, coconut water won't always be the best option for staying hydrated. But it's quite good from a mineral perspective. Simply said, it's probably not the ideal if you're drinking it for pure hydration during a workout because it's so closely isotonic. In this situation, you would really want something that would match or even provide you with a little bit more sodium. Thus, there is a fair quantity of sodium in coconut water. I estimate that each cup contains between 250 and 300 millimoles of sodium and between 6 and 700 millilon of potassium. Therefore, it has just enough carbohydrates to sort of activate that salt-glutted channel and is quite effective from a mineral perspective. When it comes to coconut water, you have two problems. It contains carbs. In addition to the fact that some people dislike eating carbohydrates when training, you run the risk of becoming so isotonic that you may not drink enough water. Since you'll be consuming more minerals throughout the day, it might be beneficial to periodically drink coconut water with meals. However, I continue to believe that regular electrolytes are generally effective when you look at the literature. I've included a link to the free variety pack of LMNT ones I use below. I continue to use Element. They are by far the finest item I eat to stay hydrated, and I've been eating them for 7 years. However, I will be really honest and say that many people prefer to consume carbohydrates throughout their workouts. Because the carbohydrates will let those minerals to be absorbed, you would want to take something like element electrolytes and some carbohydrates at the same time if you were doing that. The benefit of element is that, like me, I exercise on a very low-carb or fasting diet. When I train, I don't want to consume carbohydrates. Element was initially created for those following a lower-carb diet. 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium was the ideal ratio to achieve the highest level of hydration without the use of carbs. So that's why it works so well for me personally. I prefer to maintain low insulin levels. I prefer not to consume carbohydrates during the day. I'd like to simply drink water. However, all you would need to do is add something like element electrolytes and a teaspoon of honey to your water if you want to increase your intake of carbohydrates and slightly increase your hydration through that process. Because coconut water is so similar to our baseline electrolytes, it functions similarly to an intravenous system, IV, but it doesn't draw water in that way. This is why it's included under Alternative Plus How to Hydrate Properly for a Workout. That's where the widespread misunderstanding lies. I'm not criticizing coconut water then. It won't hurt you, but because it prevents that gradient from drawing in extra hydration, it doesn't have the hydration component that people believe. One of the other foods you may eat, and I've already discussed this, is watermelon. Well, watermelon is a terrific item to eat throughout the day because, as we often forget, it's crucial to hydrate your muscles before doing out. According to a report released by the Committee for Military Research, performance declines exponentially as soon as your total body weight drops by merely 3% due to water. All right? Because the glycogen will really hold water, you would want to have enough water the day before, or if you take carbohydrates, a sufficient amount of carbohydrates the day before together with hyperhydration to load. For every gram of stored carbohydrates in your muscle, you store roughly 3.7 grams of water. This can be accomplished by eating carbohydrates, or if you're on a lower carb diet, by continuing to be low carb until your body begins storing carbohydrates through gluconeogenesis from fat or protein, which is exactly what occurs. The process of converting other substrates into glucose and replenishing glycogen is known as gluconeogenesis. But for low carb drinking, something that's more sodium-based intra-exercise, increasing the quantity of carbohydrates you consume, roughly 6 to 10 grams per serving of electrolytes, will help you achieve a slightly higher osmolarity. Again, though, the minerals are more important than the carbohydrates, and for that very reason, coconut water isn't as great as it seems, even though it appears amazing on paper. I'll tell her,